America and where that goes. Some of them are analysts over there are debating what comes after that. Is populism, if Trump, say, he wins or he loses, well, that's one factor, but what comes after that? Are the excesses of populism going to take... These are heavy issues, obviously, but this is what Trump has kicked into. He seems to have a connection to that part of America that is thinking, yeah, we hate this. What's it all about? And these kind of strange little 3-second bite things that we think, well, what are they talking about here? But it's touched into something.
But is that not exactly what I'm asking? Is that not exactly what Hitler was, a populist, and that's how he rose to power by just
manipulating,
scratching the itch.
You're absolutely right.
A couple of people have pointed out on text, by the way, I should correct this, that Cameron was talking about Trump's policy as stupid, divisive and wrong. He never actually said that Trump was stupid, divisive and wrong. It's a fine line.
Well, Trump took it the other way. He said, I can tell you people that I am not stupid and I'm not divisive and I'm not wrong. Yeah. So, he took it personally.
In fact, Donald Trump challenged the new Mayor Sadiq Khan to an IQ test. He got it mixed up. He thought it was the new London mayor who'd called him stupid. I don't know. If you were him, would you take him on? It might be that he's actually really clever.
It was a wonderful thing that the new mayor said in reply, though. He says, well, I wouldn't take up his opportunity to go to the United States under his policies because it's not just about me, it's my whole community and the people I've supported in the past.
Getting lots of text messages in. I have 3 ghost houses as neighbours. I'm on View Road, Mount Eden. There's a $1.8 million house empty. The owner lives in Dubai. In Wanaka, half the houses are empty. That's amazing because Wanaka is one of the places down south that's feeling the squeeze. That's got a real rental problem as well. The ghost house behind me is... I've lost that one because they're coming in so fast. I live next to a state house in Westmere, empty for 3 weeks. Our neighbour's house empty for 3 months now. A house 2 doors down from me has been empty since before Christmas. And this person, Caroline, points out what a few people are saying. She wishes someone would start squatting in there. Maybe that's what will happen.
That's crazy.
Well, if you've got an overseas investor and, how are they going to stop someone going in? I've spoken to a number of people in Glen Innes and Mount Roskill who've told me about ghost houses on their streets. It absolutely is a problem in Auckland. And it's positively criminal given the housing crisis we're facing.
This is a whole nother element, isn't it, of this whole problem.
All right, time for one more quick one. Interested on your thoughts. It's another study for you to finish the hour. This time it's Harvard, though.
So it must be real.
That's right. It comes with a bit more punching power when it comes from Harvard. Women who go to church more than once a week live on average 5 months longer than those who don't. Well, we better ask the woman on our panel, would it be worth it?
I'm pretty sure I would die sooner if I was in any religious institution more than spending time anywhere else. I'm not sure how they measure that or how they do it, but it sounds crazy to me.
Or why do you think people...
The placebo effect of prayer.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Well, placebo or not, if it's helping you to live longer, don't knock it, right?
If you're happy with the fairy god monster or whatever.
I don't think Christians refer to him as the fairy god monster. I haven't read the Bible recently. Selwyn, unfortunately, the study, quote, cannot be generalised to men.
Well, that's my cop-out.
Or to young adults. Or other religious groups, such as Jews, Buddhists, Muslims and Hindus. The people that described were mostly older female Christians. But do you have a theory on why there may be a relationship?
I wonder whether or not it's attached to the socio-dynamic of the person. If we look at our stats here in New Zealand, where the low socio-economic status of an area is in evidence, then you've got a higher morbidity rate, higher death rate.
Or you're maybe just a better person, but maybe you avoid the vices like drinking and smoking.
Yeah.
Well, the spirituality factor is an issue, so people tend to live longer when they're believers or something like that.
Yeah, not when they call them a fairy god monster. Here's one to finish off with to think about. In the late 90s, we sold a house in Auckland to Hong Kong Chinese. To our knowledge, they've never lived there. The house was vacant for about 15 years. It was always a problem, but it appears to have accelerated in recent years. Thanks, Peggy. Nice to hear from you. Thanks to our panellists, Golnaz and Selwyn. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Checkpoint on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoints on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, the Prime Minister said go to WINZ if you're homeless and sleeping in a car. We speak to people who did. They're still homeless and now they're in debt to WINZ. The man who killed Blessy Gatinko, he was being monitored when he did it, but an inquiry finds the responsibility stops entirely with him. Detective Rod Drew, who led the police investigation into the deaths of 3 children, Teresa Cormack, Lily Bang and Coral Burrows, retires. We talked to him about his career and that kind of police work. And Kiwi Steve Adams plays on the highest platform America's NBA has to offer and comes out on top. All of that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, as always, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. An advocate for the poor says homeless people are racking up thousands of dollars in debt to work and income because of having to borrow money to stay in motels. Work and income can lend people money for motel stays and emergencies when there's nowhere else for them to go. However, they then have to pay the money back. Alistair Russell, who's an advocate with Auckland Action Against Poverty, says some families are borrowing more than $1,000 a week, and one owes work and income $60,000. He says they can never repay the debt, but have no other option other than to live on the street. Meanwhile, a South Auckland church says more than half its members are struggling with housing. The Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga in New Zealand says more than half the 30 families at its Otara church are still waiting for help and are forced to live in homes with 2 or 3 families. A representative, Lupe Tukatau, says the situation continues to worsen and she doesn't see a way out.
When I walk down to the bus stop and I go, oh, what would this area be like say in 5-10 years time? Slums, more people building their own little tents or whatever because population is increasing and I don't see any solution at the moment.
Lupe Tukatau says the pressure of the living conditions is turning some people to crime. The husband of the murdered Auckland woman, Blessy Gatinko, has poured scorn on the Corrections Department, saying it's inept and unable to manage high-risk offenders. In fact, says Antonio Gatinko, it's the offenders who manage the department. Edward Gay reports.
Tony Robertson was jailed last year for life with a minimum non-parole period of 24 years after being found guilty of raping and murdering Mrs Gatinko. Today, a government inquiry cleared Corrections of any fault in handling his release from prison 6 months earlier. Despite electronic monitoring and a curfew, he still managed to run Mrs Gatinko down in his car and rape and murder her before dumping her body in a North Shore cemetery. Mr Gatinko said the report's finding is disappointing and devastating, and the family's now regrouping to consider what to do next. A spokesperson says the possibility of a civil case has not been ruled out. This is Edward Gay.
Cases of measles have now been reported in Northland and Nelson following an outbreak in Waikato. Waikato has 22 cases confirmed so far and 12 other possibilities. The Northland District Health Board says it's had 4 confirmed cases and 1 unconfirmed. One person is believed to have caught the virus at a kapahaka event in Waikato and then returned home. The Nelson DHB says it believes one teenage girl was infected after visiting Hamilton, but nobody else in the area is considered at risk. The government has announced what it calls the largest ever funding increase for health research in New Zealand. The pre-budget announcement of an extra $97 million over the next 4 years was made at the Milligan Institute of Medical Research in Wellington this afternoon. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there.
The Ministers of Science and Health say the boost will lift the money available through the Health Research Council from a planned $321 million to $418 million over the next 4 years. Most of the extra funding will be for researchers, with extra support also available to current longitudinal health studies. The Ministers, Stephen Joyce and Jonathan Coleman, say health research, particularly in medicine, is a strength of this country's science system. And they say the extra funding will improve health outcomes and health delivery while attracting and retaining top researchers. This is Karen Brown.
The Prime Minister says he's keen to see a resolution to the impasse over Christchurch's cathedral. An announcement is due this week on the fate of the city's most recognisable building, which has remained a sad ruin since being badly damaged in the February 2011 earthquake. Legal wrangling between its owner, the Anglican Church, which wants to demolish it, and heritage advocates who want to restore it has led to a stalemate. Today, John Campbell said he can't comment on the coming announcement, but something needs to happen soon.
It really needs to be dealt with because I think ultimately tourists are starting to come back, the CBD is starting to be rebuilt, and it's a very obvious sign of the earthquake. And while we're not trying to take away from that, the city needs to move forward, and I think at the moment, it just in a physical sense, holds that back a little bit. So we need a resolution to the issue.
John Campbell speaking in Christchurch this afternoon. In sport, the Oklahoma City Thunder have beaten the defending NBA basketball champions, the Golden State Warriors, 108-102 in the opening match of the Western Conference Finals in Oakland. They trailed by 13 points at half-time but came to life in the second half, with playmakers Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook sparking the turnaround. New Zealand's Steven Adams had a strong night, scoring 16 points and taking 12 rebounds, but told ESPN the Thunder didn't have a strong game offensively.
If you're talking about making shots, then probably not our best night, but I felt like we made quite a few strides in our defense and how to guard these guys, and that's all that really matters, man, is containing their, making sure their points are as low as possible.
Steven Adams. Game 2 in the best-of-7 series is on Thursday. The Warriors centre Solomone Kata will miss Saturday's NRL game against Canberra after being suspended for one game for a dangerous tackle on Penrith's Jamie Soward during Saturday's loss to the Panthers in Christchurch. An estimated 250,000 people have turned out to watch Leicester City parade the English Premier League football trophy through the city. One of those enjoying the occasion on the open-topped bus was striker Jamie Vardy.
All the shops are shut, everyone's hanging out the windows, on the roofs. Look what it means to the city and what it's going to bring next year as well. We're just enjoying it at the front now with the trophy.
The Leicester City striker Jamie Vardy, and that's the news.
Housing crisis.
They've already been beaten down by the system, so simply saying trot on off to your nearest WINS office and they'll get it sorted out, it simply isn't going to happen.
Sustainable fisheries.
We are quite sceptical of that report. We have had observers on boats, we've had cameras on boats, we've had GPS tracking.
Measles vaccinations.
We don't always get it right, so it is appropriate to question. But once there is really strong scientific evidence, then let's really support it.
Getting under the skin. Susie Ferguson and Guy Espin, a morning report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Labour's environment spokesman David Parker on his party's approach to water, who owns it and should there be a price on it. And after 10, British entrepreneur and TED head Chris Anderson on the power of a good talk. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine, but a period of rain around the middle of the day tomorrow, potentially heavy and thundery. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including the Central High Country, rain and squally thunderstorms developing tomorrow morning, easing to isolated showers tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, fine spells increasing today, a period of rain spreading north tomorrow, potentially thundery in Wellington, west to northwest gales developing south of Napier tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, rain tomorrow morning, heavy and potentially thundery, clearing in the afternoon. Bulletu Fiordland, rain and squally thunderstorms developing overnight, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury to Southland, a few showers tomorrow, becoming confined to Southland and Otago in the afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 5:09.
Thanks, Katrina. In a moment, Blessy Gutinko and the man who killed her. He was being monitored, he was wearing a GPS tracking bracelet, and he was being subjected to frequent checks on his whereabouts, but he still managed to go out and kill a woman coming home from work. The blame for that rests solely with him. An inquiry has found coming up what the family and the minister think about that. But we do begin tonight with a homeless person's experience of WINS. The Prime Minister said turn to them for help, so we've talked to people who have. Checkpoint has spoken to some people who were granted emergency accommodation but found themselves charged for it, are now hit by debt, then went back to square one after 7 days and worse. Checkpoint has spoken to other people who were told there are no rooms available and to come back later. And we spoke to people for whom emergency housing was a very temporary measure and their long-term problems remain. Now, from September, the government will start putting people in motels for a week free of charge. But advocates say it's not enough. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, begins this report from Alex Ashton.
My really strong advice is go and see work and income, and we'll see what we can do, because I think people often don't understand what's available to them. My experience of work and income is they do their very best to support people in those situations, especially when children are involved.
The Prime Minister, John Campbell, speaking on what homeless people living in cars, garages or on the street need to do. Go to work and income. He was talking to people like Nicole. For the last 2 weeks, she's been living in a motel with her 3 children, 6, 2 and 8 weeks old. Her stay cost $2,200, money loaned to her from work and income. But today, Nicole's booking runs out. When I spoke to her this afternoon, she was at work and income, begging them to loan her more money so the family can stay in the motel. She says work and income have no other options for her, and so tonight, bed looks likely to be her car.
That makes me terrified for my kids especially, because the first time that this has happened to me, I stayed in my car and it was, something I couldn't sleep through, and just watching my kids have to sleep in the car was something that I didn't want.
Are you more worried about being in debt to Winds and owing them money, or
No.
are you more worried about just having nowhere to sleep?
Having nowhere to sleep is my main concern.
She's not alone. Diane moved into a hotel with her children aged 8 and 3 on Friday. Work and Income's paying for it until next Monday. The stay's costing $1,600, which is all she says Winds will loan her. She then has to pay it back at $16 a week. Diane is worried about the debt, but she doesn't have a lot of options.
I don't know, because I don't own a car, and all my family's houses, they're full.
It's not the motel bill that's worrying Diane most. It's where she goes next. She's trying to get on the wait list for a state house, but the first phone appointment, just to register, is on the 30th of May. That's a week after Diane and her children have to leave the motel, and she doesn't know where they'll sleep that week.
And when I actually do get a house, I don't even know if they're going to pay the bond.
Are you worried about the future?
Yes, I am, because there's no houses anywhere.
Beneficiary advocates who help people access work and income and Housing New Zealand say Nicole and Diane aren't isolated cases. Here's Alistair Russell from Auckland Action Against Poverty.
I've just spoken with a woman who now has a debt of over $60,000 to work and income. Also looked at another case where a family is paying $1,330 per week to stay in a motel.
Families which he says are falling deeper into debt by the week. Another advocate based in the South Island, Kay Brereton, is seeing the same problems.
If someone went to work and income and said, it's my choice, I want to go and live in a motel now, work and income would go, absolutely no way, we're not lending you that, that's not sustainable. But this is kind of sitting around the other way, where work and income are going, well, the only place we can put you is a motel and you're going to have to borrow the money off us.
Kay Brereton doesn't want the policy scrapped, at least this way people get off the street, albeit indefinitely, and indebting themselves in doing so. She and Alistair, Nicole and Diane all say the same thing. There just isn't enough affordable housing. Nicole is understandably worried.
I'm feeling sad, angry, don't know where else I'd get help from.
Okay.
Just want to be on the right track.
No one from Work and Income was available for an interview. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
Yes, as Alex said, we did go to Work and Income for an interview and they said they couldn't speak to us about it. They said they would provide a statement. That has just arrived. It says it will always try to help people in ways that don't get them into debt, but it says sometimes hotel or motel accommodation is the only option. The Deputy Chief Executive, Carl Crafer, also reiterates the changes coming in September, which include more emergency housing beds and, as mentioned, 7 days in a hotel in emergencies. And of course, in those situations after September, the people who get that emergency accommodation won't be billed for it. He says repayments are based on individual circumstances at present. We also invited the Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, to speak to us about all of this. However, her office hasn't responded. It's 14 minutes past 5. We turn now to the inquiry into the management of Tony Robertson, who raped and murdered Auckland mother of 3, Blessy Gatinko. That was in May 2014. In August of last year, the government established a look into matters surrounding his management. This was after he'd been released from jail at the end of 2013. It was believed and acknowledged that Robertson posed a high risk of reoffending. But the inquiry determined, and I quote from Mel Smith's conclusion, "I have not found that any failings or deficiencies in systems or practices in the management of Robertson following his release from prison provided any opportunity for the murder of Mrs. Gatinko." In other words, the report declares one person alone is responsible for the crime, Tony Robertson himself. This has devastated the Gatinko family. We begin with their spokesperson, Ruth Money, on what she thinks of the report.
One word, offensive. Another word, uneducated.
It will be 2 years next Tuesday since Blessy Gatinko was raped and murdered by Tony Robertson. Robertson's earliest criminal record included assault, aggravated robbery, possession of an offensive weapon and threatening to kill. Then in 2006 he was sentenced to 7.5 years imprisonment for abducting a child he committed indecencies upon and the attempted kidnapping of 2 other children. He was declined parole 3 times and served his sentence in full. On his release he was under special conditions, a curfew, and was being electronically monitored. Blessy had come home from work on the bus and was walking from the bus stop to home. Robertson ran her down in his car, bundled her onto the back seat before driving back to his house where he raped her and murdered her. The next morning he put her body into bush beside a local cemetery. The GPS monitoring bracelet didn't prevent it, but it did tell police exactly where he'd been. Today, the question that was most important to Blessy's family remains unanswered. If he was being monitored, how did no one know what Robertson was doing?
Or how could we have stopped him doing what he did on our watch? Department of Corrections was responsible for him.
Ruth Money has been the family spokesperson throughout these terrible 2 years. Blessy's husband, Antonio, has endured somehow with immense dignity. Today, he read a statement.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My family and I are both disappointed and devastated by the inquiry's findings. Having reviewed the report and all the evidence at trial, we remain firmly of the view that the Department of Corrections' ineptitude enabled that evil killer to take our Blessy. It is glaringly obvious to us and the wider public that they do not have the capability to manage these high-risk sex offenders. In fact, I think the offenders manage them. How this was not investigated by the report astounds us. We are now going to regroup and think about next steps in our journey for justice for Blessy. Thank you for your time and please respect our family's privacy at this difficult time.
After his statement, Antonio Gatinko shook the hands of the reporters who'd attended, one by one, thanking them for coming.
The family presented to the inquiry. The family have held themselves with so much mana over this whole period, and they were really hoping for a report that said, we can learn from this, we can do better, Blessy's death's not going to be in vain, and here are some things that we've learnt. We've gone offshore, we've learnt best practice, and this is what we're going to prevent this from happening ever again in the name of Blessy. There's nothing in there that does that. They are so devastated. I mean, you saw Antonio. He's once again broken. And we're a week out from Blessy's passing.
2 years now. Tony Robertson, who was flagged as high risk but who had served his sentence and had to be released, is now serving an indefinite jail term. He denies his guilt, despite DNA evidence, despite GPS evidence, despite overwhelming evidence against him. A man who was being monitored and still went out and killed a woman coming home from work.
What does monitoring mean? We assume, quite wrongly, that that person, every move was being watched, every breach or signal or escalation was being managed so that they would not and did not act in the way that they ended up acting in. And that's where Antonio's heart bleeds the most. He wanted to prevent this happening again, and he does not believe that that report is going to do that.
Oh, that's the family spokesperson speaking just after the media conference this afternoon. Meanwhile, the Birkdale community on Auckland's North Shore had no idea that a child sex offender who actively avoided rehabilitation while in prison was living amongst them. The neighbours of Tony Douglas Robertson had no idea about his past. It included, of course, abducting a child and committing a indecent assault on them. And 6 months on from his release, he raped and murdered Blessy Gatinko. Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith spoke to our reporter Edward Gay and says changes have been made.
So it's a case-by-case decision that's made about notifying neighbours, and
We regularly do, and there was, I think, a high-profile case just last week that was well covered by the media where we notified neighbours of an offender in the community. Mel Smith reviewed this aspect, as with many, and he didn't raise a question about the judgment we made, but rather said the process by which we got there could have been better.
But here you had a sex offender who had served the full 8 years of his sentence for abducting children and indecently assaulting them, and he had willingly avoided any kind of rehabilitation inside. He was then put into the Birkdale community, and no one knew of his past.
It's a judgment call always, and it will always be a case-by-case judgment call.
But was that the
local
right
managers-
judgment?
Mel Smith has independently reviewed this. I mean, that's the point of having an independent review. And he's not questioned the decision. Simply he said, the process could be a bit different, and we have reviewed how we do that to make sure that there are more people involved in that decision-making.
But as the Chief Executive of Corrections, was that the right call?
Well, that's the difficulty, you see. People have to make these judgments all of the time, and that's why we asked, the government asked Mel Smith to review this independently. And so really I'm moving with the review. His judgment is that people were entitled to make that decision.
But what's your opinion on that, though?
Well, I think it has to be one that's dealt with case by case by the people that are on the ground and involved in the matter. So what I can say to you is that, probation staff and managers around the country have to make those difficult decisions every week. Excuse me. And just last week there was a decision made to talk to neighbours about one. Sometimes that won't be the case.
I mean, I know it's easier sitting in my chair. Yeah, sure. And with hindsight, looking back and judging Robertson and judging those who dealt with the case. But the facts are that he was a child sex offender who had avoided any kind of rehabilitation, had opted out, actively avoided it. And that community, and the offending happened down in Tauranga, and he was now up in Auckland. The people of Birkdale had no way of knowing Robertson's past.
Well, I think the primary risk that's seeking to be avoided by notifying neighbours when there's a sex offender in the community is that sex offenders, where notifications take place, generally we're concerned about their behaviours for grooming young children. And so what we do is dependent on the level of risk that's presented will determine whether those notifications are made. So, sex offenders don't all fit the same profile, and the risks they present are different. And in fact, very, very sadly, the offence that occurred here was not with a child and was not actually in the street in which he lived.
Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith. He was speaking to our reporter Edward Gay this afternoon. After 6 o'clock tonight, we're going to speak on this subject with Corrections Minister Judith Collins. That's after 6. Coming up, Stephen Adams, his Oklahoma City Thunder. You may not have heard of them, but he is a Kiwi boy playing at the top level of US basketball, and they shocked the Golden State Warriors in a thriller. Come from behind, I think. Matt Chatterton is here to discuss that with us in a couple of minutes. A Decile 10 high school given $100,000 for iPads by a wealthy overseas investor says it needs the money to help fund its poorest students. And what did the overseas investor get in return? And Australia puts on hold its plans for a backpacker tax. All of that and more coming up. We'd love to hear from you. Text 2101 if you feel inclined to text us. Our email address, of course, is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And we also have Twitter and Facebook accounts. Thank you for all your feedback. The police have cordoned off a Christchurch house in relation to the discovery of a woman's body in Rakaia on Sunday. A member of the public found the body about 7:40 on Main Rakaia Road on Sunday night. The police are treating the case as homicide and continued their scene examination today. Our reporter Sally Murphy is outside the house in Christchurch, which has been cordoned off. Hi, Sally. Thank you for joining us. What do you know this evening?
Well, I spoke to neighbours on the street who said that the police arrived at this house behind me mid-morning today and took the couple away who lived here. They said the couple have lived here for about 15 years and that they're quiet and they keep to themselves. We understand that they are related to the victim, but the police say that the coroner is still conducting formal identification, and until that's complete they won't release any more details.
OK, so you understand the couple who've gone from there are related to the victim. Any new information on the police inquiry?
No new information today. The police did continue their investigations at the scene where the body was found on Main Marakai Road. Their cordons there are still in place and they say they could be there for another couple of days. But like I said, they're still working through the formal identification, and until that's complete, they won't release any new information.
Sally Murphy live outside the house, which has been cordoned off and now seems to be central to one aspect of this inquiry. It's 5:25. Very early for us to have sport. In fact, I think this may be the first time we've had it before the 5:30 headlines, but pretty remarkable, the story of Steven Adams. He helped his Oklahoma City Thunder team upset the Golden State Warriors in a thriller playoff match at the Oracle Arena in Oakland. He looks set to become New Zealand's highest paid sports star. Today he scored 16 points in his team 108-102 win. This is basketball, of course, if you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Our sports reporter Matt Chatterton is here to tell us all about it. Remind me of the relationship between Steven Adams and Valerie Adams. Are they siblings or cousins?
They are half siblings.
What a remarkable family.
Yes, well, I think there's about 12 or 13 of them all up, siblings, and majority of them are over 6 foot, so they've got some good genes in them.
Incredible. So he is the youngest New Zealander to be picked in the first round of an NBA draft. Mm-hmm. He's playing in the final, 16 points, and it come from behind victory, was it, Matt?
Yes, they were down by 14 points at one stage against the Golden State Warriors. Now, Golden State are the reigning NBA champions. They have the MVP, most valuable player in their team, Stephen Curry. And the Oklahoma City Thunder had lost their 3 regular season games to Golden State going into this match. It is a best of 7 series, so there is still a lot of basketball to be played. But for them to get their first up win over Golden State in the first game at Golden State, home court in Oakland, is a good start for the series. We actually do have a little bit of audio from Stephen talking to ESPN following the match. This is how he thought the game went down.
We just come in and we know it's going to be a grind. Whatever the outcome is determined by how hard we come out, and I felt that we came out, asserted our aggressiveness, and came out on top, mate.
They controlled, most of the game, and then you guys came on late in the third. What was the key to turning this around?
Just sticking to the game plan, man. Obviously, the first half they were making shots and stuff. We can't get discouraged by that. If we stick to the game plan, then that'll give us, they'll put us in the best position possible to win the game. Sorry, boy.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't feel like you guys played a great game for you guys, but you came out with the victory. Is that accurate, and is that a good sign?
It depends how you look at it, mate. If you're talking about making shots, then probably not. I haven't looked at the stat sheet, but probably not our best night. But I felt like we made quite a few strides in our defense and how to guard these guys. And that's all that really matters, man, is containing their, making sure their points are as low as possible.
For you as a big to get out on the perimeter and chase these guys around, how much of a challenge is that?
Mate, I don't envy guards, mate. They're quick little monkeys, those guys.
Yes, that was Steven Adams there talking to ESPN following the match. Steven Adams actually had quite a good game himself. He had what's called a double-double, where he scored 16 points and got 12 rebounds in the match. So he played quite well.
What is a rebound? Explain for people who don't follow basketball.
If you take a shot at the hoop and you miss, someone then jumps and grabs the ball off the miss.
In defence.
Yes, in defence. And in offence, that you can do the same in offence as well. So Adams is quite good at that because he's so tall. He's 7 foot tall, so that's very helpful. And now they have their next game on Thursday, still in Oakland, game 2. So, the winner of this series will face the winner of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Cleveland Cavaliers and Toronto Raptors in the NBA Finals. So,
What's Steven Adams being paid, Matt? Do you know roughly?
Yes, I think he's on about $5 million a season at this stage. He's still on his rookie contract. He's still got another year on that contract, but he is likely to sign on to a veteran contract where he could make in the tens of millions people over in America are predicting. So, he is on track to become New Zealand's highest paid athlete.
Unbelievable. Right, let's talk about the Warriors team they've named for this weekend. They're playing the Canberra Raiders in New Plymouth, which will be a wonderful occasion.
They are. Simon Mannering returns from injury.
Which is great.
Yes, he had a rather unfortunate facial injury against the Storm on Anzac Day. And Isaac Luke returns to starting hooker. He is from Hawera down in...
down in the mighty
So he's
Taranaki.
playing in front of a home crowd. So great news for him.
They need to win this, don't they?
They do.
Golly. So that was a statement of the obvious. Matt Chatterson, thank you very much indeed, Matt. We appreciate it. Amazing. A rookie, and he's earning $5 million a season. 5:30, Sting. Coming up on Checkpoint, the government has announced its largest ever funding increase for health research in New Zealand. We're going to get the details of that, why you'll pay more for power the further you live from a power station, and the history professor and author who's correctly predicted the outcome of every US presidential race dating back to 1984. He has his own system and, well, it's remarkably successful. But first, Katrina Batten with the 5:30 headlines at 5:30.
An advocate for the poor says homeless people are racking up thousands of dollars in debt to work and income because of having to borrow money to stay in motels. Work and income can lend people money for motel stays and emergencies when there's nowhere else for them to go, but they have to pay it back. Alistair Russell from Auckland Action Against Poverty says some families are borrowing more than $1,000 a week, and one owes work and income $60,000. The widower of the murdered Auckland woman Blessy Gutenko says the Corrections Department is inept and unable to manage high-risk offenders. Despite electronic monitoring and a curfew, Tony Robertson ran Mrs Gutenko down in his car and raped and murdered her before dumping her body in a North Shore cemetery. Today, a government inquiry cleared Corrections of any fault in handling his release from prison 6 months earlier. Antonio Gutenko says the finding is devastating. Cases of measles have now been reported in Northland and Nelson following an outbreak in Waikato. The Northland District Health Board says it had 4 confirmed cases and 1 unconfirmed. One person is believed to have caught the virus at a kapahaka event in Waikato and then returned home. The Nelson DHB says it believes 1 teenage girl was infected after visiting Hamilton. The government has announced what it calls the largest ever funding increase for health research in New Zealand. The Ministers of Science and Health say the boost will lift the money available through the Health Research Council from a planned $321 million to $418 million over the next 4 years. The Prime Minister John Campbell says he's keen to see a resolution to the impasse over Christchurch's cathedral. An announcement is due this week on the fate of the city's most recognisable building, which was badly damaged in the February 2011 earthquake. That's the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is going to tell us about the New Zealand dollar, which had a bumpy old ride this afternoon. Why was that, Nona?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the Reserve Bank of Australia, they put out their minutes, and in the minutes, it wasn't what the market was expecting. They thought, maybe the Reserve Bank of Australia is not going to cut interest rates as much as we thought. So what did that do? The New Zealand dollar went, against the US dollar, it went up 0.5 cent. It followed the Australian dollar up, but then it also fell against the Australian dollar.
Yeah.
90 minutes later, what happened? The Reserve Bank of New Zealand put out the inflation expectations looking out into the future. It hardly changed at all from one quarter to the other. So, maybe interest rates in New Zealand are going to be cut. So what did that do? That caused the New Zealand dollar to move. Let's see now. It went up and then it went back down, up again and down again. So in the end, though, it just ended up in the exact same spot.
Normally, investor money leaves falling interest rates, doesn't it? It goes in search of better returns elsewhere. But you can't get better returns elsewhere at the moment because everyone, the central banks just about everywhere, have got their rates as low as they can. I mean, negative rates in Japan, for goodness sake.
But look, the thing is, the fact that the inflation expectations looking 2 years out hardly changed really just entrenched some of the opinions that the economists already had. So will the Reserve Bank cut? Well, maybe they'll cut in June. maybe they'll cut in August, maybe they'll cut in June and in August, or maybe they won't cut at all.
And this comes back to a thing that we've discussed really very often this year when you've been in here, and that is that this money is flighty, that every day they're looking for new direction, and that the markets everywhere are terribly unsettled, right?
Well, watch this space, because the CPI numbers for the US are coming out in just a few hours, and that's going to really
start it all over again.
But hey, so in the end, our New Zealand dollar was mixed at 68 US cents, 92.5 cents Australian, which has hardly changed at all from yesterday. But the NZX Top 50 Index had a record high today. Yes, indeed. Ending up almost 1% by 61 points to 6,975.
Yeah, that's incredible. Nona Peltier, thank you very much. Nona, appreciate it. Nona, our Auckland business reporter who comes and sits with us in the studio most nights. The time on Checkpoint is 25 to 6. The idea that you pay more for power if you live further away from power has, I suppose, a kind of logic to it, I guess. But it's also a national lottery of a kind, where those in Wellington, Rotorua or Blenheim or a string of other places keep money in their pockets, while those in Auckland, the Far North and even Ashburton will have to dig a little deeper to pay the power bill. And this is where it becomes complex. And that's exactly the future situation suggested by the Electricity Authority today, as they propose an abrupt move away from the one-size-fits-all approach to charging for electricity. Worth exploring further, we thought. Catherine Hutton is going to do the job.
Under the current system, those living in the South Island, close to power plants, are paying more than those who live further north, in places like Auckland. But the authority wants to change the pricing structure so it reflects the cost of delivering electricity to households, as the authority's Chief Executive Carl Hansen explains.
What our proposal is effectively saying that those regions in the north would just be paying a small part of the benefits they're getting. Overall, they are better off having got the investment and paying for them.
The Far North and Auckland and Ashburton in mid-Canterbury are among the 14 areas that could expect price increases. But in 15 regions, including Invercargill, Christchurch and Wellington, power bills would fall. The authority's chair, Brent Layton, says the increases reflect improvements to the network the authority calls grid reliability, as is the case with Auckland.
In Auckland, they now have a grid reliability service, which means that if not just one, but if two major transmission assets go out and a generator goes out, they will still have supply in Auckland. So that the reliability being paid for by everybody on an equal basis is not being delivered on an equal basis.
The authority expects the average increase to work out at about $11 per household a year, but in Auckland it's flagging possible increases of more than $50 a year. Raywin Fox, who heads the family budgeting service, says they already see hundreds of families who are struggling to pay their power bills.
It may not sound a lot per year, but for families that are really struggling on a minimum income, any increase is going to stretch their budget every week.
The news is better for those living in Invercargill, with Mayor Tim Shadbolt welcoming the proposal as good for the South Island.
Down here we have very robust winters, and we like to keep our citizens as warm as possible, and we have a very tight network down here. We're very close to the sources of electricity. We're a very small, compact urban city, and we don't have huge transmission costs.
One exception is Ashburton, a mid-Canterbury town prone to cold winters and facing the largest possible increase in the country of about $100 a year per household. Electricity Ashburton's General Manager Gordon Guthrie is still studying the authority's 400-page report, but he says the proposed increase probably reflects the fact that demand in summer is more than double what it is in winter because of irrigation.
Currently the transmission prices are based on when the peak demand at the grid exit point, where we take the electricity from the grid, and that's based on when the peak occurs. And in the Upper South Island, it has been traditionally in winter when there's winter heating going on. Like I say, I haven't actually seen the detail of how it works, but I assume it's based on the amount of energy that's used more than when the peak demand occurs.
The proposal also provides some certainty for the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, which is the single biggest user of electricity in the country. In an earlier proposal released last year, the authority indicated a reduction of up to $50 million a year in the power bill, but that's now dropped to $20 million. The authority says the discount reflects the amount of electricity the smelter uses, and if it closed, transmission costs for all consumers around the country would go up 11%. People have 10 weeks to give their feedback, with any changes not taking effect until April 2019. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
And we'd love your feedback on that. If you have some, we've got feedback of a different sort coming up in about 3.5 minutes. But first, a Decile 10 high school that was given $100,000 by a wealthy overseas investor says it needs the money to help fund its poorest students. David Chuang and Lim Mi Lin made the donation to Wakatipu High School to get Overseas Investment Office approval to buy sensitive land in Arrowtown. As Sharon Brett Kelly reports, they're not the only ones making hefty school donations to get the office's consent for their investments.
When David Chuang and his mother Lim Mi Len decided they wanted to buy the 19-hectare lifestyle property for $2.7 million, they had to prove the deal would benefit New Zealand. The son and wife of Singapore rich lister John Chuang chose Wakatipu High School as their beneficiary. Their Queenstown lawyer, Elliot Goldman, says the $100,000 donation was the centrepiece of their application to the Overseas Investment Office.
It's essentially just an amount that the OIO will consider on a case-by-case basis, and ultimately it's up to the applicant in an OIO application to establish that the actual amount of the donation is one that's going to result in the benefits that are required under the Overseas Investment Act.
Elliot Goldman says his clients looked at other options before choosing the school.
They liked the sound of Wakatipu High School, and just that their needs were ones that they were willing to support because of the decile status of that school.
It's the first time a wealthy overseas investor has given money to the Decile 10 school. The chairman of the school's foundation, Mark Taylor, says the donation was timely.
The decile system is a pretty poor indicator of need, and I gather the government is looking to address that. But with high housing costs and below average wages in the hospitality and tourism sector, we certainly have quite a number of parties that have a high needs and funding requirements.
Mark Taylor says most of the money will help parents buy laptops and tablets for their children, and about a third will be used for teacher training. He says none of the school trustees oppose the donation and would welcome more money from overseas investors.
We were definitely comfortable. The OIA Act was changed, I think, under the last government to be much wider than just strict economic benefit and include a much wider definition of benefit to New Zealand. A lot of the projects early on were environmental projects, but educational development was as worthy as environmental projects.
Since 2009, 16 schools and universities have benefited from overseas investors' donations, grants or scholarships. In January, Bernard Sabrier from Switzerland was allowed to buy more land at Mataka Station in the Bay of Islands for $1.4 million after he gave money to the Bay of Islands International Academy. And last year, Mao Huaye from China got consent to buy a multi-million-dollar investment property in Auckland after promising to set up a $60,000 scholarship for children at Decile 1 or Tahuhu College. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says he's comfortable with the donations.
It's no bad thing that they can do that. It's a contribution to the community they're effectively investing in.
But the Green Party's Eugenie Sage says the donations are ad hoc gifts for rubber stamp approval from the Overseas Investment Office.
It's a totally inappropriate way of evaluating whether a foreign owner contributes to New Zealand. It potentially will lead to corruption if overseas investors can just donate to a local organisation or school and get a rubber stamp to buy New Zealand land.
Eugenie Sage says schools should be funded by the government, not overseas investors. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
Time now for some of your feedback, which I have put somewhere else on my desk, and I have it now. John, the purchase of sensitive property by overseas buyers in return for a one-off gift of $100,000 is obscene. John Key's government is actively encouraging a land grab by greedy, selfish foreigners who don't give a damn about New Zealand, says Michael. of Masterton. The government should seize vacant private houses when non-resident owners of more than one home refuse to tenant them, put them compulsorily for rent unless they're not fit for habitation, 3 months to rent, or seizure by law, says Thomas. This is obviously in response to the housing crisis. This is from Grey Lynn. In my wealthy Grey Lynn street of 90 mainly old villas, 7 of them recently enlarged and fully renovated are undergoing further, probably not urgent additions, as there is a shortage of builders to build new lower cost homes to ease the housing crisis. Could each building company be made to be legally obliged to devote a certain percentage of their work to building affordable homes? Lots of suggestions of some kind of compulsion around the management of this. Thomas previously with seizing empty homes, and this one here suggesting builders be required to do some work responding to the housing crisis. And John, why would you bring another child into the world when you can't provide for the ones you already have? What has happened to responsibility? Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We really welcome your feedback. It's coming up to 5:45. The government has announced its largest ever funding increase for health research in New Zealand. The pre-budget announcement of an extra $97 million over the next 4 years will boost the Health Research Council's budget by more than 50%. The announcement was made at the Melligan Institute of Medical Research in Wellington. Professor Graham LeGros is the Institute's research director and joins me by phone now. Welcome to the programme, Professor LeGros. Yeah, really good. Probably not as good as you, though.
Well, actually, did you see the thing? There's a spontaneous applause from the assembled researchers. Fantastic. It is a bit of a nation-building exercise. Can I just jump in there? Because we've never had this before. We've never had the expression of confidence from the political process that, hey, let's start doing it here. I'm really excited. I suppose I feel now doubly challenged. We've got to do something with this money that really has that societal impact at many levels.
Yes, there's $97 million over 4 years, right, coming through the Health Research Council. How much of it is the Melligan Institute getting? Do you know yet?
Oh, no, we've got to, no. It's not actually for the Melligan in that sense, but we've got to bid for it, compete for it, try and think of ways we can use it wisely to actually create a health impact or societal impact or economic impact. But yeah, it just gives that kind of confidence to the people that would love to attract New Zealanders, bring New Zealanders back and make New Zealand a great place to be.
So can I come in there? Bring New Zealanders back. So have you lost people in the last few years who have gone off in search of bigger research budgets elsewhere?
Yeah, let's not say brain, let's say entrepreneurial, building a community drain. We actually have lost the people that can make a difference over a number of years, and I think this shows there's an investment here for the future, and it won't affect me personally, I don't think. I'm going to get too old. But I think for the younger ones who think, well, hey, they're investing in this country, I can make a career and build something there, because you want that longevity of support.
Has there been a sense that you could have done more faster with more money over the past few years? I mean, this is a day of celebration, but has it been a period of frustration prior to that?
It's been a difficult time, I think, for everyone up and down the country. We've just bled talent, we've bled capability, and that's why it's a watershed moment. I think we've been challenged a few years ago to say, well, you've got to convince the political process that you're going to do something with the money. It can't just be an academic exercise, this sort of thing. And I think there's been a lot of work done behind the scenes to sort of see that there's something useful to be done with this kind of investment.
We look at how much pressure the government is under to fund new things. You know, lots of talk about new drugs, for example, in the treatment of cancers. Lots of talk at the moment about emergency housing and state housing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so really good points. You know, why put this when you can buy so much more cancer drugs and stuff? But I think there is a place for targeted health research to get better bangs for the buck, actually know, because there's a range of health issues. It's not just cancer, although cancer is really important. It's how we act, and research across a number of different areas can actually do that and bring better outcomes for people.
And also
we can make our own cancer drugs here in New Zealand.
Exactly, and that's what you're working on at the Melligan Institute.
Exactly.
There's exciting work taking place there, and it means we're not going to be paying, $8,000-$10,000 per treatment of immunotherapy drugs that we're getting from Big Pharma, right? If you guys can...
We have that Kiwi approach, because we know what we're doing it for and who funds us.
Yeah. So, in a way, this is a tremendous vote of confidence from a government that likes to see, like all governments, bang for its buck.
Yeah, I think very much. And given it, it's been pretty hard. I don't know how Stephen and Jonathan Cohen did that, but, because everything's looked at very tightly, but I think it's a tremendous vote of confidence.
Okay. What are you working on there at the Milligan Institute that you are most excited about, and you're going to go to the Health Research Council and say, hey, we'd like a bit of that money because this is what we're up to?
Well, cancer, we can see some good things there, and there's a bit about funding and better delivery there of services to more people. Allergy, I've got to make a play for this one because a lot of people are suffering from allergic diseases of all sorts, gut health, and we want to actually make a few discoveries, and this will be a chance for us to actually bring that up a level.
Is there pressure on you to return something immediately? In other words, 6 months after you've got the money, the OIOs begin. There's the Official Information Act request, and people are saying, hey, have you cured cancer yet?
Yeah, we get that all the time.
Right,
Yeah,
and yet the great science is science that is unencumbered by having to look over your shoulder, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But you do have to have process in place to actually make sure they're working on things that will lead to something. And we do that a lot amongst ourselves as scientists. We give each other a hell of a hard time. And, you can't just let people wander. You've got to actually make people drive and thrust for the future.
Great day.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, we're very pleased. As a community, I think we're overjoyed because it's been pretty bad news for a decade or two, I think.
That is Professor Graham LeGros, who's the Institute's Research Director at the Milligan Institute of Medical Research in Wellington. We talked to the Milligan Institute a bit about the work they're doing there. Obviously, all sorts of trials had to be gone through, and obviously there is nothing worse in medicine and in science than promising something before you have absolute proof it's efficacious. But it is very exciting, some of the work that they are involved in, and we will check back on how they are going, and we'll also look at seeing where this extra funding goes. The Australian government has delayed the introduction of the controversial backpacker tax after fears tourists would boycott the country in favour of New Zealand. Goodness gracious me, we couldn't have that. However, opposition parties are still calling for the tax to be scrapped altogether. The ABC's Louise Yaxley reports.
The tax is set to raise more than $500 million over 4 years, but tourism operators and farmers have been arguing loudly that taxing backpackers at 32.5% from the first dollar they earn will wipe out the seasonal workforce, as young international travellers choose places like New Zealand with a lower tax rate. Today, the Small Business Minister Kelly O'Dwyer announced a delay and a review.
It is a whole of government review that's going to be looking at making sure that we are internationally competitive, making sure that we address the issues to do with the taxation and supply of working holiday makers who are coming to this country and making a fantastic contribution.
But the government's under fire for consulting now rather than before it announced the tax in its 2015 budget. Industry groups, including the Tourism Export Council, say the delay means backpackers considering an Australian holiday will still be unsure of what to expect and more likely to consider New Zealand. The Greens leader Richard Di Natale says the delay is the wrong option.
Don't delay it, scrap it. This is a bad tax. It's bad for agriculture, it's bad for tourism, it's bad for the economy.
But Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce, who's been under real pressure from his backbench, defends the review.
That gives us another 6 months. This gives us the clear capacity to deal with this issue. I strongly believe that we can get, if required, a resolution through both houses of Parliament.
Labor hasn't revealed its position on the tax, but the opposition leader Bill Shorten is critical of the government's process.
The budget was barely 2 weeks ago and the bits and pieces and the wheels are falling off it. What a schmozzle. This is a government who cannot govern.
Independent MP Bob Katter, whose electorate includes many sectors affected by the tax, is scathing of the decision to delay it.
I mean, do they seriously think that we are accepting a 6-month delay as an assistance to us? I mean, all we're going to do is lose the backpackers. Now, the Greater Cairns region will die without the backpackers. You take all those young people out and you will tear a hole a mile wide in the tourism industry of far north Queensland as well.
Independent MP for Indi, Cathy McGowan, welcomes the decision as a win. She says many sectors will be desperately waiting for the outcome of the review.
That report from the ABC, 7 minutes to 6. My next guest certainly isn't the only pundit to be confounded by this year's US presidential election campaign, but Alan Lichtman is a history professor and author who's correctly predicted the outcome of every US presidential election back to '84, when Republican Ronald Reagan won a second term, defeating pop quiz head Democrat Walter Mondale. Alan Lichtman, a distinguished professor of history at American University, has developed a prediction system, the keys to the White House, based on 13 true-false statements. Now, this has nothing to do with punditry. In fact, he actually abhors it. It has nothing to do with opinion polls. The system that's proved remarkably accurate, often months or even years ahead of time, is based on a notion of stability or instability. A sort of set of projections developed a bit like earthquake modelling in Christchurch after the earthquakes. You know, you're more likely to have future shakes. You've kind of got the beginning of Alan Lichtman's system there.
In earthquake prediction, I look at two things, stability and upheaval. And we redefine presidential elections in those terms, not in terms of one candidate versus another, or Republicans versus Democrats, or liberals versus conservatives, but stability. The party holding the White House keeps the White House, and upheaval, the party holding the White House is tossed out of the White House. And we have a theory. Our theory is that the American voter is fundamentally pragmatic, that the voters are not swayed by the debates, the speeches, the ads, the tricks of the campaign. In fact, campaigns don't matter at all. Rather, it's the fundamentals that matter. That is, if the party holding the White House has done a good job governing the country, the voters will give that party 4 more years. If not, they'll turn to the challenging party. And we looked at every election from 1860, back in the horse and buggy days of American politics, Abraham Lincoln versus Stephen Douglas, up to Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan in 1980 in the age of television, polls, and jet planes. Remember, this is 1981. And we came up with a model and a decision rule for carrying out our theory of performance-based voting. And the model is really simple. It's the world's only do-it-yourself prediction system. All of your listeners can buy my book, Predicting the Next President, and predict the next upcoming election on their own. And the model is simple. It's 13 yes, no, or true-false, let's call them true-false questions, about the political environment prior to a presidential election, focusing on the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And if 6 or more of the keys are false, that is turned against the party in power, they get 6 strikes. 6 strikes and they're out. If fewer than 6 of the 13 keys are turned against the party in power, they are predicted to win.
This is fascinating because it excludes the kind of thing that the media is obsessed with. And I want to go back, for example, to Clinton's second tilt at the presidency, where he had the Lewinsky scandal, he had Ken Starr chasing him around like a man possessed, there were impeachment proceedings, but actually the people of America didn't really give a damn about that. It influenced their personal opinion about Clinton, but the factors that determined whether or not they would re-elect him as president transcended that, right?
That's right. Following the day-to-day, and no offense to the media, but media has to write a story every day, but following the day-to-day events of the campaign is like trying to understand the tides of the ocean by looking at the froth on the waves. The keys to the White House tap into the underlying tidal forces that determine presidential elections. As far as conventional punditry, conventional analysis, take all that and do to it what the great British philosopher David Hume said you should do to works of superstition. Consign them to the flames. They're worse than useless.
And in fact, punditry very often gets it wrong. And we have seen a great many examples of that through the primaries, the US primaries, the selection of both the Republican and Democratic candidates. But we stick with it, we persevere with it. Is it simply because punditry is essentially a media creation and it's keeping us all in work?
That's all it is. It's smoke and mirrors. Look, what do the pundits rely on for telling you what's going on in a presidential election? Obviously, the polls. Well, no one has actually voted yet, and no one's going to vote for many, many months. So how do you know if a poll is correct? There's no reality check. So you take another poll, and so on and so on. So the traditional pundits can never be wrong because they can always say, well, I was right at the time the poll was taken, and no one can disprove that, but they can never be right either because there is no reality, no underlying science to what they say, and they keep adjusting their punditry up until the election itself. And, of course, nobody remembers what the pundits said a few months ago. Let me give you a classic example.
Yeah.
In 1988, I made my prediction of a George H.W. victory in May when Bush was 17 points behind Michael Dukakis. And I was derided by the pundits, of course. How can you say that? Of course, once the polls and the elections came around, the pundits came around saying that brilliant George Bush, he ran that negative campaign against Dukakis.
Alan Lichtman, we're just going to cut that interview off very shortly. Just before it was over. A Navy commander accused of groping a junior officer's bottom. This is a court-martial that we've been covering a bit on Checkpoint. Kate Newton is on the phone. It's the second time a court-martial has heard the case after a previous hearing in March failed to reach a verdict. The officer says the commander grabbed her 4 times during a naval social event at the Devonport Naval Base in 2012. Kate, very quickly, is there a verdict?
Yes, John, the panel of military members has just come back and they have found the commander guilty. So after 2 court-martials, we do now have a result and he will return tomorrow morning to the naval base for sentencing.
OK, we're going to speak over the pips highly unusually. What was the commander accused of doing, Kate, exactly?
So there was a dinner and then followed by some more informal drinks in 2012, and this woman says that she was standing sort of close to a wall. She felt somebody grope her bottom. She described it as a full grope, and she turned around and the only person in the vicinity was this Navy commander. She says she felt this happen several times over the course of the night. The final time she turned around, swore at him, he raised his hands in what she says was a gesture of mock innocence. His defence tried to argue that gesture was one of actual innocence, but the panel today has obviously chosen to accept this woman's version of events.
Kate Newton, thank you very much indeed. A guilty verdict just to hand in that court-martial. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thank you for being with us. Katrina, a little bit late, but the 6 o'clock news.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A South Auckland church says more than half its members are struggling with housing. Social housing groups say the number of people living out of cars or garages is getting out of control, with many on Housing New Zealand lists for years. The Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga in New Zealand says more than half of the 30 families at its Otara church are still waiting for help and have to live in homes with 2 or 3 families in them. A representative, Lupe Tukatau, says the situation continues to worsen and she doesn't see a way out. She says unless Work and Income does a better job of helping such families, in a few years' time her neighbourhood will become a slum. Fonterra executives have admitted they need to listen more to help change public perceptions of the company. The admission came at a Dairy NZ Farmers Forum today, where farmers challenged the company about what they called its arrogant image. Joe O'Brien was there.
800 farmers at the Mystery Creek Event Centre outside Hamilton heard presentations on Fonterra's international marketing strategy. The company says it's using social media to target young global consumers with different nutritional needs. But while farmers at the forum welcomed the strategy, they told Fonterra it's losing the image battle at home because of perceptions it's not listening. Fonterra's Chief Operating Officer, Jacqueline Chow, said the company is working to rebuild trust by being humble and fronting up on issues. At Mystery Creek, Joe O'Brien.
A Navy commander accused of indecently assaulting a female junior officer has been found guilty. The officer says the commander grabbed her buttocks 4 times during a social event at the Devonport Naval Base in 2012. He denied the charge, with his lawyers saying the woman had not seen his hand actually touch her and it could have been someone else. However, after deliberating for nearly 3 hours today, a court-martial panel of 3 senior Defence Force members delivered a guilty verdict. A previous court-martial in March failed to reach a decision. The commander will be sentenced at a hearing tomorrow morning, when name suppression may also be lifted. Two Boston brothers accused of urinating on and beating a homeless Mexican man and telling the police that, quote, Donald Trump was right, all these illegals need to be deported, have been sentenced to prison. Scott Leader and Steve Leader have been sentenced to 3 years and 18 months in prison, respectively. They told the police they attacked 58-year-old Guillermo Rodriguez as he slept in a subway station because they believed he was an illegal immigrant. Mr. Rodriguez says, in fact, he's a permanent resident. A critic of the country's first proposed community wind farm says it's a political statement at the community's expense. The $6 million project would put 3 wind turbines on Porteous Hill, north of Dunedin, to generate enough power for all of the area's 1,000 homes. A 3-day hearing for the Blueskin Energy project began this morning in Dunedin. A major landowner at nearby Doctors Point, Graham Bennett, says the claimed benefits of the plan do not stack up.
It seems more like a political statement than anything else to me. And I don't think anyone has the right to make a political statement at the expense of the rest of the community.
Graham Bennett says the plan does not have widespread community support as claimed. New research argues not including agriculture in moves to tackle climate change will make it very difficult to keep global warming within the agreed 2 degrees limit. 103 of the 195 countries that agreed to the limit at the Paris summit last year have pledged to reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
A global team of scientists estimates agricultural emissions should be reduced by about 1 billion tonnes annually by 2030 to help achieve the goal set in Paris. Their paper argues that current interventions will only deliver up to 40% of what's required. One of the authors, New Zealander Andy Reisinger, says while more than 100 countries have said they want to reduce agricultural emissions, few have a clear plan of how to do it. He says a more coordinated effort between national and global institutions is needed to make progress. From Parliament, Chris Bramwell.
The high-profile public servant Margaret Baisley is set to retire as chairperson of the Canterbury Regional Council after this year's local body elections. Dame Margaret, who's been a public servant for more than 60 years, was chosen to lead the council's government-appointed commissioners after the elected council was sacked in 2009. This morning at the official opening of the council's new office building, she was given a standing ovation by staff. Speaking to media in Christchurch this afternoon, the Prime Minister John Campbell said she'd done a tremendous job. To sport, and the New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams has played a key role in Oklahoma City's upset 108-102 win over the reigning NBA champions, the Golden State Warriors, in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals Series. Adams scored 16 points and took 12 rebounds and converted an errant pass by teammate Russell Westbrook into 2 vital free throws with just a minute to play. He told ESPN while the opening win may be a surprise for many, it didn't surprise him.
Not at all, man. We just come in and we know it's going to be a grind. Whatever the outcome is determined by how hard we come out, and I felt that we came out, asserted our aggressiveness, and came out on top, mate.
Steven Adams' Game 2 is again in Auckland on Thursday. After missing the last 2 games and the Kiwis' loss to Australia, veteran Warriors forward Simon Mannering will return to the starting lineup for Saturday's NRL match against Canberra and New Plymouth. Mannering's missed the matches after suffering a severe facial injury in last month's loss to Melbourne. Also back in the starting lineup is Hawara-born hooker Isaac Luke, who will play an NRL game in front of his Taranaki home crowd for the first time. Prop Ben Matulino also returns to the starting 13, but missing is leading try scorer Solomone Kata, who's been suspended for 1 game for a dangerous tackle during the loss to Penrith in Christchurch at the weekend. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the seafaring odyssey of Katrina Boxall, who along with her husband raced around the world in Clipper-class yachts, on separate boats actually, partly for an adventure, partly in honour of the friends who got them into sailing in the first place. Then there's Gavin McLean talking about Jutland, the greatest naval battle of the First World War, 100 years ago this month. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, mainly fine, but a period of rain around the middle of the day tomorrow, potentially heavy and thundery. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including the central high country, rain and squally thunderstorms developing tomorrow morning, easing to isolated showers tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, fine spells increasing today, a period of rain spreading north tomorrow, potentially thundery in Wellington. West to northwest gales developing south of Napier tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, rain tomorrow morning, heavy and potentially thundery, clearing in the afternoon. Bulla to Fiordland, rain and squally thunderstorms developing overnight, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury to Southland, a few showers tomorrow, becoming confined to Southland and Otago in the afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The family of Blessy Gatinko, so corrections allowed a murderer to take the life of their mother, wife and grandmother, despite a report that clears corrections and police in their handling of the case. Tony Douglas Robertson had been out of prison less than 6 months when he ran down Blessy Gatinko in his car, bundled her into the back of the car and took her to his flat where he raped and murdered her. Today, a report into how agencies handled Robertson's release has cleared government departments, despite making 27 recommendations for changes in how high-risk offenders are handled on the outside. Our court reporter Edward Gay covered the trial of Robertson, and he's been looking at the reports.
Despite a report clearing corrections and police, Blessy Gatinko's husband Antonio lays the blame for his wife's murder squarely at the feet of the authorities.
We remain firmly of the view that the Department of Corrections' ineptitude enabled the evil killer to take our Blessy. It is glaringly obvious to us and the wider public that they do not have the capability to manage these high-risk sex offenders. In fact, I think the offenders manage them.
Mr. Gatinko says the family will now regroup before planning their next move. That could involve civil damages. The report found that there was no deficiencies in systems or practices which led to the death of Mrs. Gatinko. But Gatinko family spokesperson Ruth Money disagrees.
Absolute rubbish. There were breach after breach after breach after breach that any high-risk sex offender expert would have signalled that he was out of control.
She describes Robertson as a one-percenter and the worst of the worst who needed one-on-one supervision. She says instead a probation officer was able to downgrade Robertson's security level from high to medium.
All that does is send a signal to Robertson that all his bullshit and lies, excuse my French, is being believed. He's now got control of the situation. He had total control.
She says it's insulting that Robertson's neighbours never knew that a child sex offender who refused to get help while he was inside was now living in their community. Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith says Robertson breached his release conditions, but he was quickly arrested and sentenced to a further 2 months in prison. He acknowledges the Birkdale community were not notified the convicted child sex offender was living in their area.
I think it has to be one that's dealt with case by the people that are on the ground and involved in the matter. So what I can say to you is that probation staff and managers around the country have to make those difficult decisions every week. And you know, just last week there was a decision made to talk to neighbours about one. Sometimes that won't be the case.
Robertson was on electronic monitoring at the time of the offending, but Mr. Smith says that's only one tool that helps to monitor curfews and exclusion zones, such as schools for sex offenders.
I think electronic monitoring is a good thing. It makes a difference, but we don't rely on it solely. It's the probation officer that visits or makes contact, and this time I think 33 or 35 times within the space of 4 or 5 months. It's getting people onto drug and alcohol programs, and Robertson was attending his program. His probation officer got him there. You know, it's making sure that people follow the rules as you try to kind of improve their chances.
But for Robertson, that wasn't enough.
He and he alone chose to commit, you know, what is really a monstrous crime. And, I mean, my feelings and the feelings of the 8,000 people that work in the Department of Corrections are with the Gatinko family today. I mean, for them, the pain must be immeasurable.
For Ray Smith, the sad conclusion that comes from the report is there really was nothing anyone could have done to stop Robertson. For Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
The Corrections Minister is Judith Collins. I began by asking her to assess Tony Robertson and the inevitability of him reoffending.
Well, I've got to say, John, when I read Mel Smith's report about the management of Robertson, I thought this man was always going to reoffend, and really the way he offended was worse than he'd ever done before, and what he'd done before was really bad. But, I've got to say I felt that it was an inevitability. Nothing was going to stop him.
And this is the terrible situation the family find themselves in, because they believe the same thing. And so what they're saying today is, why the hell, if there was an inevitability, couldn't it have been prevented?
Well, I looked at that report too, John, and I looked to where it could have been prevented. And other than keeping him in jail, under the law at the time, I don't believe that was anything else that they could do. And it was clear that corrections went beyond their mandatory requirements. I've been told that out of the 3 to 4 months that he was being monitored by them post his release, that he was visited on 35 occasions, either to him or him coming to see corrections, that they did everything that they could short of keeping him in jail, and he had already served his entire 8-year sentence. So it's terrible. I can't imagine what the Katinko family's going through. But in this case, I think he was either going to kill Blessy or he was going to kill someone else.
And so your points are absolutely valid. He had served his full time in jail. In fact, the parole board had turned him down for parole 3 times. He was out with special conditions. There was a form of monitoring, although I do wonder if that term's a slight misnomer, because he was being monitored when he committed this crime. He was under curfew, he was being visited, and it wasn't prevented. And so what do we do in cases like this? Because I think what Blessy's family is after most of all is some kind of reassurance that we have learnt from this in a way that is meaningful and will prevent something similar in the future.
John, I wish I could say that something like this won't happen again, but I cannot say that, because I cannot tell you what every criminal mind is going to do. And in his case, he now has preventative detention, now with a non-parole application period for 24 years, and unless something changes, there's a miracle in his mind, and he changes his ways, he'll probably be in jail for the rest of his life.
The family have read the report, and they describe it as offensive. So what do you say back to them? And I think one of the things that offends them is the sense that all that could be done was done. And they say, no, actually, Blessy is dead. And so how do we respond to the Katinko family in a way that acknowledges their loss, and acknowledges their loss in circumstances that saw Tony Robertson living not far from them, the neighbours not being notified that he was there, Blessy walking home in twilight when he was out and about? Could more have been done so that people who were living near him were at least cautious? I
understand how the Katinko family feel.
Do you?
I absolutely do. I would be looking for somebody to blame. I would be looking for someone to say, can't you have done something differently? But the fact is, there is one person to blame. He has been held to account. He is the person who has never taken responsibility. And that's the other thing. He's never apologised for what he did. He's never even admitted what he did. He still ran an appeal saying that the police had stabbed Mrs. Katinko. Now, this is a person without remorse who looks to blame everybody except himself. He is the person to blame, John, and I fully understand what they must be going through, and I have the deepest sympathy, and I would say that there's one person to blame, though, and he has been held to account.
Look, all of that is true, and in fact beyond dispute. But at some level, what you're saying is that there are going to be individuals like Tony Robertson who will be released from jail and who we will only be able to monitor so much, who will be able to go and commit crimes like this very occasionally, and we all acknowledge that, and there is nothing that can be done. Is that what you're saying?
but I'm saying now that under the law that we have at the moment, we have public protection orders so that they have to stay in a home like Stuart Murray Wilson, the Beast of Blenheim, outside a prison, just outside the wire. We have preventative detention. We have some mechanisms available. But ultimately, sentenced as he was as a 19-year-old, even though the Crown asked for it, he got the maximum that really the judge could give. So for someone like him, laws are meant for people who obey them. And someone like him, most criminals would never behave like he did. But this is a man without remorse, without decency. And what I can say is that I believe he will end his days in jail.
Judith Collins, Correction Minister, we'd really love your feedback on this. What happens when somebody has served their time, has to be released under the law? There is no parole because they've served their full sentence. How are they supervised? What is done in circumstances like this? Please text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's 6:19. Teresa Cormack, Lily Bing and Coral Burrows. Those are names synonymous with New Zealand's very darkest side. All three are children who were murdered. Their names Detective Superintendent Rod Drew won't ever forget, of course. He's the highest ranking detective in the country, solving some of the most high-profile murder cases in this country's history. Tomorrow he hangs up his badge after an extraordinary career. I asked him why he is retiring.
Well, I'm retiring because I've done 42 years of very, very busy policing, and it just seems to be time to step aside and let someone else come through.
Rod, if you've done 42 years of very, very busy policing, I'm looking at you and thinking you must have started when you were about 13. Did you go straight out of school into police college, did you?
Yes, I did. I was 17, straight out of Rongotai College and as a cadet at Trentham, which is where the police college was in those days.
And what did you dream of doing? What was it you wanted to do as a youngster when you joined the police?
Oh, when I first joined, I simply wanted to be a police constable, but then as the training went on, when I was a cadet, I aspired to be a detective because I saw lots of detectives at their training courses out there. And then as my early career went on, I aspired to be a detective sergeant once I became a detective. And then I wanted to run major inquiries, especially homicide inquiries. Apart from that was actually about the limit of my desire, and of course I got to do all of those things, and I've gone on in different positions since then.
What was it about homicide inquiries that appealed to you? That's not the right word, but what was it that made you want to run them?
Well, because I suppose they're the most important crime that we deal with. The taking of a life is still the biggest crime, and they often involved very big teams, and they could be very detailed and not instantly solved in many cases. So it just appealed to my desire to investigate. I loved investigations. I loved being on the hunt and tracking down evidence. So that was the ultimate.
You talked about not instantly being solved. Of course, Teresa Cormack is the incredible example of that, where the crime occurred in 1987, and when was Jules Meekes found guilty of her murder?
Well, 19 or 20 years later, I think it was. Yeah. But it was very satisfying because we did an awful lot of work. It was a big team, and we went for a long time. I know I personally lived away from home out of a suitcase for 3 months, but we had secured the vital evidence way back then. It's not until science developed DNA techniques to identify them that we actually were able to arrest them.
Did you know at the time you were securing the vital evidence? Obviously you knew you were securing evidence, but did you know that one day this would lead to the conviction of the man who killed her?
Well, we certainly hoped so, because of course you can imagine on an investigation like that there was a huge number of nominated people of interest, suspects. Yeah. We used to call them people of interest now, but and we collected samples from quite a wide range of those who we weren't able to eliminate entirely from the investigation. So we hoped always that might identify the offender in due course.
I reckon everyone listening to this interview, when they hear Teresa Cormack's name and hear you talking about her, remembers that photo that the police used over and over and over, which looked like a formal school shot, really.
Yeah.
And it must be so hard to deal with a little girl dying in those circumstances and with her family who were, of course, heartbroken beyond description. How do you cope with that?
Well, it's very difficult. I think you simply have to be as professional as you can. You have to give the support that you can to the families. But when we're there as police officers, we've got a job to do and we have to stay focused. So getting too deeply involved in the emotion doesn't assist that. So we have to stay a little bit professionally aloof from that and simply push forward in the way that we normally would.
Are there times in the middle of the night where you lie there thinking, what the hell am I involved in here? Where it is so dark that you struggle to overcome the feelings with your sense of professionalism?
Yes, there have been. There have been times when I've reviewed, generally speaking, after the investigations have been finished, when I've looked back and reviewed what's happened. It can be very, very difficult sometimes, and I think about how dreadfully unfair it is that chance meant a particular child was victimised. But again, during the investigations, you simply have to stay a little bit professionally distant so that you can do the job that you're there to do.
Because the business of getting a conviction relies to a great extent on dispassionate policing, right? Because you're going to put someone in court and the defence team are going to scrutinise, cross-examine, bat down all the evidence you put up. And your reputation was as a profoundly fastidious police officer. You never appeared to me to rush to judge.
No, well, I think it's important in all investigations, but certainly in major serious crime investigations, that we must always be impartial, we must always be thorough, have real attention to detail, and make sure we go through and wring every fact dry before we pass on. If not, we could get all sorts of travesties of justice, and that's the last thing any of us want.
That's a great phrase, wring every fact dry. How often in your policing did that mean that you would go down really frustrating cul-de-sacs before you realise, no, this isn't where we needed to go, this isn't going to provide us with the answer?
Yeah, that's very often happened. In fact, in major investigations, homicides, for example, it's not uncommon to be going really quickly down a particular route of inquiry to find some new evidence and completely have to change tack. So, but that's the nature of it. You have to be thinking all the time, readjusting your direction on the facts that you know.
When you started doing Teresa, for example, there was no internet, there were no live crosses, there were no reporters who were able to live stream from the scene back to, their organisations, go live to air. Does the scrutiny make it tougher? Does it put pressure on you now for answers faster?
I think there is pressure like that, but I've always thought that there's a good relationship between the media and police, generally speaking, because we need each other in some ways. Of course, we're important to the news, but the news is very important to us in getting messages out during a major investigation. So, the pressure's on sometimes. It can actually detract from the time you've got available for the investigation, but it's investigatively very important for us to be in with the media to talk to the public.
If we look at the names with which you're most associated, and certainly the names with which most of us as journalists have bumped into you, it's Teresa Cormack, it's Lily Bing, it's Coral Burrows. Terrible, terrible crimes against children. Is this a darkness in us that we have to confront? Does it speak to a larger problem in New Zealand, or do you see them as distinct and separate from what defines us as a country?
Well, no, I don't think they're distinct and separate. I think there is certainly within families, within family violence, some dreadful things going on in New Zealand. Of course, these cases are a few that have been high profile for various reasons, but I could think of a good number more that I've investigated where children have been treated in the cruelest, dreadful ways. But they haven't become media events because they've been resolved quickly or for various different reasons. So we have to deal with that, and police now are trying to do that. We're trying to work a lot with our partners to improve our response to family violence, to identify those children who are at risk and to try and put things in place to prevent children from being abused in this way. I mean, I think I've said before, John, and it is dreadful that these children are so often abused by those they love the most, and it's the most dreadful betrayal, really.
Yeah, it is. If you were able to go back and speak to that little guy from Rongotai College entering the police force as a cadet, would you tell him to do it? Oh yeah, I'd tell him to go for it. I've had the most incredible career of 42 years. I've made the most incredible friends, lifelong friends. And a lot of that's been because the work we do is sometimes very difficult. It can be gruesome and it can be very hard and it can be very long hours. But, you know, when you do that, you find out who's made of the right stuff and quite quickly who's not. So I've formed some fantastic deep friendships through that. And I've been lucky to be part of some fantastic investigative teams, big and small, and policing teams in different places. It's just been a fabulous career. New Zealand's top Detective Superintendent Rod Drew, who is ending his stellar career after 42 years in the police force tomorrow. We're going to end tonight with an email from a listener in Queenstown. We've been talking about the housing crisis there. I listened to your excellent report last night and decided to write in case you do more on it and to point out some of the issues we face as older residents here. I don't think you'll find a local or a visitor who's not wanting the housing issue to be immediately addressed, but the suggestion of blunt plan changes to allow more density is causing a lot of us to be very concerned. We're probably relatively wealthy, but not compared to the money Queenstown attracts. And like lots of locals, we have to work in our 60s. We live in a town. The latest proposed plan changes allow for a density that is likely to destroy the quality of existing housing and create potential slums and thus destroy the town. This existing housing is full of working families. We've run out of time. We're going to come back to this email tomorrow because what they're saying is what makes Queenstown special. Don't destroy it to save it. We'll look at this issue in more depth in the days to come. Thank you for that email and for all of your feedback, and a very good night from all of us on Checkpoint.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A Tongan church in South Auckland says more than half its members are struggling with housing and it doesn't see a way out for them. Blessy Gatinko's widower says he's devastated. An inquiry into how her killer's prison release was handled has exonerated the Corrections Department. Fonterra executives have admitted to a dairy farmers forum they need to listen to more to help change public perceptions of the company. And a naval commander accused of indecently assaulting a junior woman officer has been found guilty. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, the search for the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH3